Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. Today I am going to be doing another book review for you, and that is for the first book in the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series by Rick Riordan, which is The Lightning Thief. I recently, a few months ago now, got my hands on the Percy Jackson series, and I'm now reading them for the first time. This is an interesting series for me because, similar to many other popular fantasy series in the 2000s, like Harry Potter or The Golden Compass, I forget the name of that series, but the series that The Golden Compass is in, and Aragon, and all those other series that were very popular at the time, getting adaptations around that time, which Percy Jackson was one of. I never actually got into Percy Jackson despite being right in the audience for it at the time. And I just never read it. And so now, as an adult, I've been looking for some other fantasy series to read, and one thing that I've been very interested in is checking out some of those series that were popular when I was a kid, and seeing what I think of them. And so that's why I decided to read Percy Jackson, and it was one of the ones that I was most interested in, because it was one of the ones that I saw the most, probably next to Harry Potter. This is probably the series that I most saw, at school and stuff. And so I wanted to read this series, and I was curious to see what I would think of it. I've always been interested in reading it because I know it is based heavily in Greek mythology and all that stuff, which I thought was really cool. And so I read the first book, and I thankfully did enjoy it quite a bit. It definitely, it's definitely aimed at a younger audience than what I am. I could tell that for sure. But it was still a very enjoyable book, even for me as an adult. So to get started with some positives for this book, I suppose the first thing I'll talk about is what I just mentioned. This book is very clearly aimed kind of maybe middle grade or early young adult, or maybe not even young adult, but kind of, early teenage years-ish, or give or take a couple of years. This book is told from the perspective of the character Percy Jackson, who is, I think, 12 years old in this book. And this is told in a first-person perspective from his point of view. And so, for that reason, obviously, this book is very clearly focused on that age demographic. And even just the way it's written, that's one thing I really enjoyed about it is, it's from Percy's perspective, and it's written in a way that feels like this story is being told to you from the perspective of a 12-year-old who is experiencing all of these things. And it's written in a way where for me as an adult, I didn't feel like it was kind of, talking down to younger people. It felt like it was something that, you as, someone that age could read it, and it just feels like someone that age is telling you this story. And I really enjoyed that about it. It was a very unique sort of voice from what a lot of other stuff that I've read. It felt like a 12-year-old telling this story. It had that kind of, just that tone to it that was a little funny to read now as an adult, just the way things were described, and things like that, and the language usage and all that stuff. It just all felt very much like that was the perspective it was from, which helped even kind of immerse me into the story even more, because it just felt believable. Another thing I liked was Percy himself and some of the other characters. I particularly enjoyed Percy and his friend Grover, as well as Percy's mom I also enjoyed. But really I enjoyed all the characters in this book, even some of the ones that appear, less frequently. I think they all, the characters in this book, it's aimed at a younger audience, so a lot of them are a little bit simpler, but they are all very well defined. You get a very good sense of who all of these characters are. Some of them have backstories to them that are interesting, and you get a little bit of that in this book, and I assume probably even some more of that in future books. So they're not necessarily, shallow characters, even though they're relatively simple, but they are, still very well defined, and have, more substance to them than just being very flat, one-dimensional characters. They're simple in the sense that they are easy to relate to and read for, again, someone in this younger audience, but they are, fleshed out enough that they're also interesting to read even as an adult, which I really appreciated. Percy, I really enjoyed. Very kind of humorous at times, I really enjoyed his personality. I really enjoyed his dynamics with the other characters, like his friend Grover, especially. I really enjoyed how they bounced off each other. You also have Annabeth, I believe is her name, who's kind of the third character out of the main trio, and I really enjoyed how they all bounced off each other. That was a lot of fun. And then even, a lot of the adult characters were really well done, and the Greek god, or not even necessarily Greek god, but the mythological characters were also really well done. And to kind of bounce off of that, seeing the mythological elements in this book was also a lot of fun. I've never been huge into Greek mythology. I've always been more interested in like Norse mythology especially, but also a little bit of Egyptian mythology and things like that. But I've always been, a little bit familiar with Greek mythology, and seeing all the little references to things in this book was a lot of fun, especially with some of the characters that you meet in this book who you find out are characters from Greek mythology, and you're, seeing them interact with the main characters, and you're thinking, okay, something's not quite right here, and then, you kind of piece together who the character is based on what is said about them and everything, and the way they talk, or the way their appearance is, or whatever. Which I really enjoyed. And I enjoyed just the mythological aspects in general were a lot of fun, and that's what added a lot of the fantasy to this book. And I think the mythological stuff was really enjoyable to read. And it did a good job also for someone like me who's not super into Greek mythology. It doesn't go super in-depth into the mythology, but it does a good job of setting kind of a baseline level of knowledge of like, okay, this is who these people are, and this is why they're important, and this is how they relate to all these other characters. There's a lot of discussions about the Greek gods in this book, and you learn about, basic information about who they are and how they relate to each other, and what all of their different qualities are, which I really enjoyed as well. To kind of wrap up some of my positives on this book, I would say another thing I really enjoyed was the action. There was a decent amount of action in this book that I really enjoyed, and then there was also quite a bit of humor, especially in the chapter titles. The chapter titles in this book were really charming and funny, and I really enjoyed them. And that's not something I usually point out, but I would read the chapter titles before a book and I would just get a little chuckle out of it. To get into a couple negative things, which I don't have a lot to say about, but there is one thing that kind of sticks out to me. You may have noticed I didn't talk much about the plot of this book, and that's mainly because I didn't feel like it was terribly compelling. And I suppose now I'll talk a little bit about what the actual plot is, which is essentially that Percy Jackson is a demigod. He is the child of a human and a Greek god. They don't know who it is when they find out in this book, but he is special in some way. And he gets sent off to this camp called Camp Half-Blood, which is basically for these other demigod children. And he gets sent on this quest to find the thunderbolts or whatever of Zeus, and all of this stuff. And so it's very much kind of a typical kind of, chosen one quest narrative, that kind of thing. It plays on a lot of familiar tropes, which made it both an easy read and also an enjoyable one, because I like some of those tropes. But the thing is, I didn't find the plot itself terribly compelling. Even though, I enjoy the tropes, I enjoyed a lot of the individual scenarios and scenes in this book. Like, there was a lot of particular scenes that come to my mind that I really enjoyed, and a lot of scenarios that the characters would find themselves in. I didn't find the actual storyline necessarily as compelling. It was just, I enjoyed a lot of the characters, a lot of the world building of the mythology and the fantasy. I enjoyed the action. I enjoyed a lot of individual scenes, but just the overarching narrative wasn't quite there for me. It was still a decent one, and it was still enjoyable, but it wasn't necessarily the main draw of the book for me. And I find that that's a lot of time how it is for me with a lot of kind of middle grade young adult books, is a lot of the times the characters and the world building really draw me in, but the plot necessarily doesn't always do that, is what I find happens. So maybe that'll be the case with the other books as well. We'll have to wait and see. But even then, I still enjoyed the plot. It just wasn't quite, you know, something that was keeping me really invested. That was mostly the characters, the perspective, the way that was written, and the world building and all those other things that I mentioned. But overall, despite that, I did really, really enjoy this book a lot. I think even more so than I expected to, because, you know, this is one of those books where I heard it was kind of tropey, and I figured, you know, it's aimed at a younger audience, and those books, you know, I tend to enjoy, but I don't necessarily enjoy on the same level as, like, adult fantasy or even some young adult books. And things like that. And whereas this is aimed at a slightly younger audience than that, I wasn't sure quite how I'd feel about it. But I did enjoy it quite a bit. It was a lot of fun, I think, ultimately, is the big takeaway that I come away with this book, is that it was just a fun, enjoyable book that I just had a good time with. Even though, you know, like I said, the plot wasn't necessarily as memorable to me. I did enjoy the characters, I enjoyed their interactions, there was some fun action, I enjoyed the mythology stuff, and all of that. It was just an enjoyable book to read, and I had a lot of fun with it. So as far as a rating out of 10 that I would give The Lightning Thief, I would give it, I think, an 8.5 out of 10. Very enjoyable book for me, and one that, even though it's not quite going to make any, you know, favorites of all time lists or anything, for me, it was still a really enjoyable book, and I had a lot of fun with it, and I would definitely recommend checking it out if you have not before. So that pretty much wraps up my review. So let me know down in the comments if you have read Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief, or if you have even read the full series and want to let me know your thoughts on that down in the comments, or if you have not read this book and you are interested in doing so. I am intending to read the next couple of books very soon. I'm probably going to try to finish up this series by the end of the year, and considering that there's only 4 more books and they're all pretty short, I think that should definitely be quite doable for me. So I'm very excited to continue this series, and I'm planning to read the next book quite soon after this one. But that is pretty much it for this video, so thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys next time.